Is Doom the Dark Ages actually harder than Doom Eternal, or did id Software just trade speed for violence with better posture? That's the question I wanted to answer because after Doom 2016 brought back the series with one of the cleanest shooter combat loops ever made, Doom Eternal took that formula and turned it into a demonic plate spinning exam where every weapon, cooldown, resource, weak point, dash, jump, flame belch, glory kill, chainsaw, and panic decision had to happen before your brain could recognize you should file a formal complaint about being overwhelmed. Then, Doom, the Dark Ages, comes along and changes the rhythm again. This game pulls the Slayer backwards in time, drops him in a medieval war against Hell, straps a shield saw to his arm, gives him a dragon, lets him pilot a giant mech, and asks a very different question from Eternal. What happens when Doom becomes heavier, slower, wider, and more brutal? So, I played the full campaign and tracked every single death to compare Doom the Dark Ages against Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal and the rest of the series. Because difficulty in Doom is weird. Doom 2016 is hard because it punishes hesitation. Doom Eternal is hard because it turns combat into homework with explosions. Doom the Dark Ages is hard because it plants you in the middle of a war zone and expects you to block, parry, push forward, and somehow survive arenas that look like Hell opened a medieval theme park with no safety. This video is going mission by mission through the full campaign to see where the Dark Ages lands. Is it easier because the movement is more grounded? Is it harder because the arenas are bigger? The enemies hit harder and the game wants you to stand your ground? And most importantly, does Doom the Dark Ages prove that Doom Eternal was peak complexity, or does it show that Doom can still evolve by making the Slayer feel less like a pinball and more like a walking siege weapon with anger management issues? So, let's get into it. Mission 1, Village of Kalim. Doom the Dark Ages opens in the village of Kalim by dropping the Slayer into a medieval demon invasion before the player has even processed that the shield is also a saw because apparently blocking was too emotionally stable. The combat shotgun gives the opening a familiar Doom baseline, but the mission quickly builds the new identity around heavier movement, shield timing, and close range punishment. The Power Gauntlet pushes melee into the core rhythm, while the Shredder adds the first range tool for chewing through enemies as the battlefield widens. Kalim works as a battlefield deployment, with the Slayer clearing the village, destroying portals, covering the Sentinel's escape, and turning a collapse into a temporary stand. The beach defense and the Titan encounter push the opening past tutorial territory and show the scale of the war immediately. The Dark Ages has made its pitch clearly. The Slayer is a frontline solution for problems that have already reached funeral planning. Death count, 1 death. The opening is reasonable, and the single death points to adjustment more than punishment. The pressure comes from learning when to block, throw the shield, close distance, and trust the Power Gauntlet without playing like Doom Eternal. Muscle memory is still driving the car. The game is teaching posture before panic, but it still finds one chance to humble us, because Doom tutorials believe in educating through violence. Mission 2, Hebeth. Hebeth moves the campaign from village defense into a sentinel weapon facility, giving the war a cleaner machine behind the chaos. The shield saw upgrade arrives here and turns the shield from defensive equipment into a spinning legal problem. The accelerator expands the arsenal with sustained plasma fire, giving the player a better mid-range attack for shields and clustered pressure. Together, these tools sharpen the identity of Doom the Dark Age. Hold ground, parry correctly, and punish anything stupid enough to enter your personal space. Story-wise, Hebeth shows that the Sentinel War effort depends on fragile infrastructure, weapons research, and power systems. Hell is actively corrupting. By the end, the Slayer has moved from saving civilians to protecting the system that keeps the war alive. Death count, 1 death in Hebeth. Hebeth stays inside the early learning curve, but the combat vocabulary is already expanding. The accelerator makes mid-range fights cleaner, while the shield saw rewards aggression when the timing is right. Death came here from treating our new tools like automatic solutions before understanding how they worked. Doom hands you power tools here, then quietly waits to see if you use them like a professional or like a guy banned from a hardware store. Mission 3, Barrier Core. Barrier Core gives the campaign its first huge-scale break by putting the Slayer inside an Atlan. The facility crisis from Hebeth becomes a battlefield engineering problem, with the Slayer moving the power core away from the city and fighting threats that need machinery on scale of Titans. The Atlan changes the campaign language immediately, shifting from shield timing and weapon swapping into giant mech combat. The war now feels large enough to need the Slayer as both infantry and heavy equipment. This mission also gives the campaign a pressure release. After 2 grounded chapters, letting the player feel the power fantasy without juggling new weapon decisions is great. This is the point where Doom the Dark Ages has shown that its escalation will move between personal brutality and full battlefield spectacle. Death count 0 deaths. Barrier core is spectacle first and challenge second. The Atlan sequence gives us a clean power trip and keeps friction low before the regular mission starts tightening again. The mission is basically Doom saying, you learned the shield, now please enjoy beating a monster with municipal infrastructure. The 0 death count works because the chapter makes the war feel massive before it starts breaking us. Mission 4, Sentinel Barracks. Sentinel Barracks brings the campaign back to ground level and into the military heart of the Sentinel war effort. The Pulverizer gives the arsenal a wide crowd damage option, which fits a mission that starts throwing more bodies into the player's space. The Impaler adds a harder hitting precision weapon or option, so the mission expands both sides of the weapon identity, crowd control and focus punishment. The Demonic Essence armor upgrade also starts making progression feel meaningful because the game is quietly and clearly preparing to hit harder. Story-wise, the barracks shows the war invading defensive spaces that should feel secure, which tells the player how badly the front line is bending. By the end, the mission pushes towards the Dragon's Den and sets up an aerial war over Eratum. Death count 4 deaths. This is the first clear bump in the curve. The death suggests that the enemy density, tighter area control, and heavier targets are starting to expose sloppy timing. The Pulverizer helps win fodder demons crowd the stream, while the Impaler rewards calmer aim against priority threats. Which is funny because the mission is absolutely allergic to calm. 4 deaths says the tutorial confidence is tracking and growing. The arsenal now needs intent behind it. Mission 5, the Holy City of Eratum. The Holy City of Eratum is where the Dark Ages fully commits to fantasy war spectacle. The Mecha Dragon turns the mission into aerial assault on Hellcarriers, and Doom suddenly feels like it wandered into heavy metal mythology and stole the parking spot. On foot, the Super Shotgun arrives and restores the classic Doom feeling of solving close-range problems with 2 barrels and 0 patience. The Cycler expands the plasma side of the arsenal while the mission keeps shifting between sky combat and ground pressure. Eratum turns the war into a fight over sacred infrastructure, with the Slayer pushing towards the Heart Chamber to recover the Heart of Argent. By the end, the campaign has widened from battlefield survival into a holy war over power sources, cities, and symbols. Death count 6 deaths. This count reflects friction from a variety of different things. The Dragon changes movement, threat reading, and target priority, while the ground sections and add weapons that make the Slayer stronger but speed up decision making. The Super Shotgun creates huge confidence, which works beautifully until confidence runs ahead of health and it gets eaten. 6 deaths feels right for a mission that hands you a dragon and somehow still forgets to include onboarding. Mission 6, Siege Part 1. Siege Part 1 is the first real wall of the campaign. The Flail adds a stronger melee option for cracking enemies and controlling close pressure, while the Chain Shot gives the player a heavy range tool for larger threats. These unlocks arrive at the exact moment the game decides to make you earn every inch of ground. The Slayer is sent into a collapsing battlefield to destroy Gore Portal, hold back enemy waves, and fall back as the city defense starts buckling. The story and gameplay line up cleanly because the rising death count mirrors the Sentinels losing control over the front line. By the end, the campaign has moved from controlled escalation into open battlefield survival. Death count 14 deaths. This is the first true difficulty spike. The deaths come from enemy density, wide objective spacing, Gore portal management, and the constant feeling that every part of the map is becoming a problem at once. The Flail and the Chain Shot help, but they arrive inside a mission that gives the player very little time to get comfortable. 14 deaths says the warm-up is over, the siege started, and Hell has discovered project management. Mission 7, Siege Part 2. Siege Part 2 continues the collapse, but pressure shifts from holding the battlefield to surviving the retreat. The Slayer fights through the city, reaches the turret, survives waves of demons, and falls back towards the hangar. There is no major new weapons here, which helps the pacing because the mission asks whether we learned the tools from the first siege. The Flail and Chain Shot now have to prove their value while the battlefield keeps pushing wave pressure and turret defense. The health upgrade from the leader encounter also fits the curve since the game is clearly preparing the Slayer for longer fights with fewer clean exits. The siege has turned from defense into desperate extraction. Death count 4 deaths. After 14 deaths in Siege Part 1, this cleaner count shows adaptation. The mission still has wave pressure, but the previous chapter already taught the lesson through blunt force trauma. The arsenal is starting to settle with the Flail, Chain Shot, Super Shotgun, and shield tools working together instead of feeling like a medieval hardware store exploded in a weapon wheel. 4 deaths says the game is still dangerous, but the player is finally fighting the siege instead of being professionally reorganized. Mission 8, Abyssal Forest. Abyssal Forest changes the texture after the siege by moving the Slayer into a dark environment built around gates, barracks, mines, and demonic infestation. The war moves from city defense into corrupted wilderness. which gives the campaign a useful change in mood. The grenade launcher arrives here, giving the player a strong area damage option and making enemy clusters easier to punish. That unlock fits the forest because uneven sightlines and crowded pockets can turn small fights into very messy ones very quickly. The armor upgrade from the leader encounter supports the same shift, helping the player survive damage from spaces that are harder to read cleanly. By the end, Abyssal Forest moves the campaign towards something older, buried, and deeply unpleasant. Death count 3 deaths. This is controlled after the siege arc. The deaths came from poor sightlines, denser enemy pockets, and adjusting to the grenade launcher rhythm. The grenade launcher gives a simple answer for groups, but also creates the classic Doom problem where confidence rises faster than health. 3 deaths says that the chapter is tense without becoming a wall, which is impressive for a mission that trusts you with explosives. Mission 9, Ancestral Forge. Ancestral Forge gives the middle of the campaign a stronger lore spine by sending the Slayer into a space built around Sentinel history, ritual, and power. The mission revolves around charging the Ancestral Heart, activating switches, clearing camps, and entering the Forge itself. The demonic essence rewards, including health and cell ammo, to make this feel like a major strengthening chapter. The Ground Fissure Shield rune also expands the shield systems, keeping the central mechanic alive beyond basic defense and parry timing. The Forge connects the present war to a deeper Sentinel legacy, giving the campaign mythic weight before it pushes us into Hell's open terrain. By the end, the player has strengthened the arsenal, deepened the shield kit, and moved closer to the supernatural machinery behind the conflict. Death count 5 deaths. Ancestral Forge is more demanding than the Forest, but the challenge stays fair. The pressure comes from more open exploration, enemy camps, leader fights, and long structures that give mistakes more room to compound. The upgrades help, but earning them requires a good target control and awareness. 5 deaths feels like the game checking fundamentals before the next escalation. The mission asks, have you mastered the shield yet? And then it grades you on how well you take care of the demons. Mission 10, the Forsaken Plains. The Forsaken Plains pushes the campaign into Hell and gives the mid-campaign a bigger sense of threat. The mission has Slayer breaching the front gate, destroying Hell's cannons, obtaining the Atlan core, and powering up the Atlan. The rocket launcher arrives at the front of the gate, which is perfect timing because the battlefield immediately starts asking for heavier answers. Multiple demonic essence upgrades, including skull ammo, health, armor, make this a major strengthening point before the next mech spectacle. The story is direct. The Slayer is breaking through Hell's battlefield infrastructure to bring the Atlan back online. By the end, the player has rockets, better survivability, and a direct path toward Azrak's castle. Death count 3 deaths. This is a surprisingly clean mission, given that it gives you the rocket launcher and throws you into Hell's open war zone. The low count is starting to suggest that weapons are arriving just at the right time and giving you enough control to prevent larger fights from spiraling. The upgrades also help keep pace with the meaner enemies. 3 deaths says the mission has bite, but the toolkit is catching up. Giving the Slayer a rocket launcher in Hell feels like giving a raccoon a forklift, but somehow it works. Mission 11, Hellbreaker. Hellbreaker pays off the Atlan setup by turning the Slayer into a walking siege weapon again. The Atlan pushes towards Azrak's castle, smashing through Titans and carrying campaigns straight into enemy territory. After the mech section, the Holy Swarm shield rune adds another layer on top of the shield by turning clean parries into group damage. That upgrade fits the mission because the final approach tests crowd control, parry timing, and confidence under pressure. Azrak's hologram gives this chapter stronger villain presence, turning the castle assault into a direct challenge. By the end, the Slayer has breached the enemy's front door and pushed the campaign from warfront chaos toward personal confrontation. Death count 0 deaths here. Hellbreaker works as a power fantasy and pacing reset. The Atlan section has scale, dodges, stomps, and titan crushing, but it never becomes a roadblock. The Holy Swarm shield rune makes the shield feel even more central by rewarding a clean defense with group damage. 0 deaths lets us enjoy being overpowered before the next climb. Hellbreaker is the game saying, you survived the siege, here's the mech, go commit architecture. And at this point, the Holy Swarm shield rune is what I use for the rest of the game. Mission 12, the Sentinel Command Station. Sentinel Command Station brings the campaign back into military infrastructure after the Atlan power trip. The Slayer recovers the hangar key card, opens the hangar, and reconnects with Surat, so the campaign can return to dragon scale movement. The Ravager lands in the middle of this mission and gives the arsenal a focus damage tool for enemies who have survived the unusual nonsense for too long. The Demonic Essence health upgrade after the Pinky Rider fight makes this player sturdier before the difficulty of the next climb. The auto turret shield rune then turns the shield into a portable lawsuit, but I really never used it. The Slayer has reconnected with Surat, expanded the shield kit, and pushed the campaign back towards supernatural threat. Death count 7 deaths. This is the real This is a real pressure step after the Queen Atlan chapter. The danger comes from tighter interiors, empowered enemies, ambush rooms, and the adjustment period around the Ravager. The auto turret rune arrives late enough to feel like a reward after the station has already dragged the player through several ugly rooms, but again, I had already upgraded the other shield rune, so I didn't really use it. 7 Death says the mission is built from smaller pressure points, with the game closing doors, filling rooms with demons, and hiding the keycard somewhere behind that trauma. Mission 13, From Beyond. From Beyond shifts the campaign back into the air and makes Surat the center of the chapter. The Slayer hunts 3 tentacle weak points, lands to close 2 demonic portals, and keeps switching between dragon combat and normal arena fights. Surat combat asks for a different kind of awareness, with perfect dodges, empowered attacks, lock-ons, and hellfighters pulling attention across the sky. The portal landings keep the chapter grounded, while the leader fights reward ammo and armor upgrades that prepare us for the next climb. The mission widens the threat from city siege into something stranger and cosmic. By the end, the campaign feels bigger, wider, and much harder to explain to a normal insurance adjuster. Death count, 5 deaths. The danger comes from control switching and aerial readability. Dragon chapters ask the player to read distance, incoming fire, weak points, and movement in a different combat language, but it's really easy because it's so simple. The ground fights interrupt that rhythm, which creates adjustment deaths, even as the upgrades strengthen and our long-term build is just becoming cracked. 5 deaths feels fair for the chapter that's asking us to play both Dragon Pilot and Demon Exterminator. The Slayer can apparently do both, which feels like a resume lie until the bodies start piling up. Mission 14, Spire of Nerethal. Spire of Nerethal is the mid-campaign chapter where the game decides the player has become too comfortable and needs a scenic vacation inside a nightmare tower. The Slayer drains water levels, deactivates stasis emitters, obtains the BFC, and releases the old one. Heaven Splitter arrives during the stasis sequence, giving the shield another powerful rune option and making parries feel like divine weather with anger issues, but again, I didn't use this rune. The BFC becomes one of the campaign's biggest weapon moments, since the Ballistic Force crossbow is basically an apology for enemy health bars. The mission has ritual weight, with the player unlocking something ancient, buried, and surrounded by warning signs everyone has seemingly ignored. By the end, the old one is released, the arsenal has a massive emergency button, and the campaign has entered full Doom mythology mode. 13 deaths here. This is the second major spike of the playthrough. The pressure comes from the mission length, layered objectives, Komodo campaign pressure, stasis fights, water traversal, secret landing combat, and constant switching between Surat and ground combat. Heaven Splitter helps once it clicks, but the mission keeps testing whether the player can create clean parry windows. The BFC is powerful, but the mission makes you earn it first. 13 deaths says mid-campaign, get serious and start charging rent. And again, a lot of these deaths came from right before we were going to get the BFC. It would have been very useful in the fight right before it, but, you know, we got to grind for our overpowered weapons every so often, right? Mission 15, City of Ryul. City of Ryul follows the Old One chapter by moving into a portal-focused city full of cosmic eyes, shield charge rings, water sections, and puzzle movement. The objectives sound simple. Activate the portal and pass through the gate. In practice, the mission feels like a game built a theme park around shield mechanics and forgot the friendly signs. The Dread Mace arrives in the middle and gives melee combat a heavier identity, letting the Slayer answer crowded fights with a medieval workplace incident. But again, I had already upgraded the flail all the way and didn't really see any use in using this one because it had such a slow recharge. Health and armor upgrades from the leader fight keep survivability growing after Nerethal's punishment. The Slayer has activated the gate, strengthened the melee kit, and moved deeper into the strange religious machinery behind the war. Death count, 7 deaths. The count shows steady friction, but it's not a full wall. The pressure comes from movement puzzles, cosmic eye alignment, water sections, leader fights, and adjustment periods around the Dread Mace. The Dread Mace gives huge close range damage, but it also encourages greedy players and greedy plays in Doom, usually ending with a screen looking like a new medical invoice. 7 deaths fits the chapter that mixes combat, traversal, puzzles, and melee confidence. Mission 16, the Carthurl Marshes. The Carthurl Marshes slow the campaign into a swamp-based relic hunt after the stacked pressure of Nerethal and Ryul. The Slayer gathers 2 relic fragments, assembles the relic key, and enters the portal to keep the campaign moving. There is no major new weapons here, so the mission functions as a mastery check for the arsenal already earned. Leader fights reward armor and ammo upgrades, making the chapter a practical strengthening stop before the final third of the game. The wolf statue puzzle and the ray stones gives the marshes a stronger exploration identity. But the campaign has already moved from Mythic City traversal into a darker relic path towards the Temple of Lomerith. Death count, 2 deaths. The cleaner result suggests the mission is readable and forgiving than the last 2 chapters, and there isn't really much difficulty here. We have the BFC if things are hitting the fan, and it is a satisfying answer to large enemy groups that are getting too ambitious, but it really says that this mission, 2 deaths, the marshes work as a breather without going empty after Nerethal and Ryol. This mission lets us stretch our legs and only gets mildly bullied by the swamp. Mission 17, Temple of Lomerith. Temple of Lomerith moves the campaign into a coastal temple space built around gates, sunken ships, portals, and ancient sentinel machinery. The Slayer follows gates, activates pathways, swims through wreckage, and eventually enters the temple itself. Spike ammo and cell ammo upgrades fit the chapter because the game is building the player into a stronger walking disaster before the finale closes. The Raystone reward also makes Lomerith feel like a late campaign shopping trip where every aisle is haunted. Story-wise, the mission carries the player through another mythic threshold and deeper into older machinery behind the war. But Lomerith hands the next mission a much uglier setting. Death count, 5 deaths. This is a moderate count, and it's mostly due to leader fights. The ammo upgrades help with the large difficulty curve, but you do have to earn them, and it does require navigating spaces with less direct readability than standard arenas. 5 deaths says essentially the mission is fair while still punishing wandering attention. Temple of Lomerith asks us to solve ancient door problems while demons interrupt like they're paid to ambush. Mission 18, Belly of the Beast. Belly of the Beast is one of the most literal Doom mission titles possible because the Slayer is now fighting through a giant living nightmare and trying to escape. The mission starts with survival, then turns into destroying organs, entering the temple, and rescuing Thera. The setting shifts the tone immediately because the campaign leaves ancient ruins and moves into something wet, hostile, and medically concerning. There's no major new weapons here, so the mission is just testing our late-game toolkit. The armor upgrade from the Acolyte leader helps in packed spaces with acid pools and wave pressure, but overall, the campaign has turned rescue, survival, and body horror into one compact chapter. Death count, 2 deaths. The low death count here is because everything's readable. Like, in Doom Eternal, it was a question of whether or not you could tap into the flow state, but with how generous shield parry times are, you can pretty much tap into that flow state at any point in time, and you can just dismantle the bigger demons by stunning them with the shield and just demolishing them with your weapons. The armor upgrades also help because it's a big factor in player adaptation. By this point, the shield, the BFC, Dread Mace, Super Shotgun, Rocket Launcher, Chain Shot, they're all working together, but you don't really need to have them work together. You can use the shield and you can use one trusty weapon. Mission 19, Harbor of Souls. Harbor of Souls turns the late campaign into a barrage theft mission, which gives the chapter a fun identity inside the larger war. The Slayer fights through enclosed spaces, activates mechanisms, raises water levels, grabs skull keys, and pushes towards the helm. Health and ammo upgrades keep progression moving, but you get ammo upgrades for the skull ammo, which I never used, and it's not like our heavy arsenal really demands any additional support at this point. The Raystone makes the chapter feel valuable for us because we can still use it to upgrade any of the odds and ends of our weapons that we haven't fully upgraded and use on a regular basis. Story-wise, the Slayer is now taking enemy infrastructure and steering the campaign towards the next confrontation. Hell has lost control of the ride, which feels like a serious asset protection failure. Death count, 2 deaths. Harbor of Souls is tense, but it's controlled. Again, we're tapping into that flow state that is so much easier to tap into than Doom Eternal, and if you are in trouble, you use a BFC and lean into your shield runes, and everything goes swimmingly. That's why it's really easy to feel a lot of good, positive momentum instead of a roadblock here. Mission 20, Resurrection. Resurrection gives the late campaign a strong story by turning the Slayer back to the mortal plane and immediately throwing him into another siege. The mission starts with the Resurrection, then opens into a large battlefield built around destroying 3 siege towers. Each tower is tied to a leader fight, and those fights reward health, Reaver ammo, and armor upgrades. That structure makes the chapter feel like both a comeback and final preparation route. The wolf statue puzzle and Raystones add a few more upgrades before the final boss stretch. By the end, the Slayer is back, the arsenal is sharper, and the campaign is racing towards the final confrontation. Death count, 1 death here. Again, it's very clean. Yes, it's a large battlefield. Yes, there's a lot of enemies, but you can tap into that flow state. You can just dismantle the heavy demons by stunning them with your shield and demolishing them with a super shotgun or a rocket launcher or anything along that sort. It's essentially saying the Dark Ages combat language is very simple, much simpler than Doom Eternal. And so the Slayer returns from resurrection and immediately resumes project work like hell forgot to revoke his building access. Mission 21, the final battle. The final battle is the campaign's real exam, and the death count proves it. The mission starts in an Atlan, with the Slayer destroying Hellgate generators, fighting multiple Titans, and using the Siegebreaker shoulder cannons to finish and tear through the battlefield and giants. The opening is already huge, and the chapter escalates into a boss fight again, the old one. The old one demands boss pattern reading, dodges, astral projections, and clean reactions to a wide battlefield. Then the game rejects the Slayer from the mech and forces us to fight against enhanced Azrak, turning spectacle into a personal duel. By the end, every scale of the campaign has returned at once. Mech warfare, ancient horror, villain payoff, and grounded Slayer combat. Honestly, enhanced Azrak is a pain in the ass. I died pretty much every death in this mission in the enhanced Azrak fight. And by the end of this campaign, which we're really close to, you have to fight enhanced Azrak 5 separate times, which is insane. But as I mentioned, death count, 27 deaths. This is the highest count in the entire playthrough. And it's a clear difficulty spike. And it's because Doom the Dark Ages, you have so many fodder demons out and about that you can always replenish health, replenish armor, replenish ammo. And the pressure in the final boss gauntlet, in the Titan fight, it's not that bad. Old one, pretty easy to read. Enhanced Azrak, that's a different story though. While Azrak tests parries, spacing, reaction, and patience, I certainly lacked in patience. The spike feels earned because the game has spent the whole campaign building the toolkit before asking for a final performance review from Hell's worst management team. 27 deaths clearly says the campaign saved its harshest lessons for the end and checked every mechanic, upgrade, bad habit, and ounce of confidence left in the room. Mission 22, Reckoning. Reckoning is the epilogue mission with T. After the massive boss gauntlet, the entire campaign sends the Slayer through the temple grounds into the lower keep towards Azrak's ship and into the last push to destroy him. The mission feels like final cleanup, but it still has enough enemy pressure, secrets, keys, and upgrade rewards to close properly. I pretty much was bored of the combat loot at this point, so I didn't do any of the extra stuff. I upgraded my grenade launcher, and we were off to the races to take on Azrak. It is funny though, because there is a launcher armor ammo upgrade that I did pick up near the end, and it's funny because the game is still handing out capacity rewards after the final exam has already been giving, and it gave me a concussion. The Raystone rubies and secrets make the chapter feel like there is a last chance to really brush up on anything, but again, I ignored them at this point. Reckoning narrows the campaign from cosmic spectacle into the final act of ending Azrak schemes. Death count, 9 deaths. This is a meaningful drop from Mission 21, but Reckoning still lands among the more dangerous late campaign chapters. The deaths come from the final boss fight. Yes, you have to fight Azrak 2 times in this mission and 3 times in the last mission. So at this point, like, you should know the loop, you should be able to anticipate the parries, but he does continue to add a few extra strikes here and there, and that's why I continued to die quite a few times. And really, the launcher ammo upgrade helps, but it arrives late enough to feel like the reward for surviving most of the chapter's pressure wasn't really that worth it. 9 Deaths says Reckoning refuses to become a victory lap. The game lets the player leave only after one last round of demon paperwork. So, after 22 missions, 121 deaths, multiple dragons, multiple mech fights, and one very angry shield, and enough modern demons to qualify Hell for a population crisis, where does Doom the Dark Ages land? For me, it's far easier than Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. That may sound strange with 121 deaths, especially when the final battle alone came and caused 27 of those deaths, but the full campaign tells a different story. Most of the Dark Ages is very manageable once the shield rhythm clicks. The biggest spikes are obvious. It's in boss fights where you don't have a ton of fodder demon to help make sure you can keep up on your health. And the final battle becomes the last real exam. Outside of those moments, the game is smoother, more forgiving, and easier to stabilize than the previous 2 modern Doom games. Doom 2016 punished hesitation. Doom Eternal punished bad resource management. Doom the Dark Ages mostly punishes bad shield time or positioning, and moments where the battlefield gets too crowded to cleanly read. The formula makes the game more approachable, but it also makes the campaign less enjoyable for me over time. I think I was bored at about mission 14 Even though I hadn't had every upgrade, I hadn't had every weapon, I was like, okay, this is an easy loop. I always have enough ammo. The biggest issue, again, is the combat loop because it feels less dynamic. In Doom Eternal, the game constantly pushed us across the entire arsenal because ammo, weak points, cooldowns, and enemy types demanded it. That could feel exhausting, but it also kept us engaged. It also kept me engaged. The Dark Ages has way more fodder. And once you fully upgrade a single gun with those fodder demon all around, you always have ammo, so you pretty much can just rely on that one gun. I could lean on my upgraded weapons for huge stretches of the campaign, and that reduced pressure to rotate weapons, manage ammo carefully, and constantly rethink my approach. The result is a game that looks massive, sounds brutal, and feels incredible in short bursts, but starts to flatten out across the full campaign. I barely used the Skull Crusher style weapons. I barely used the chain shot. Even when the game kept handing me more tools, I did not feel the same pressure to master the entire arsenal. Doom Eternal made it feel like a nightmare spreadsheet with demons attached, and you had to master it. You had to master every weapon, but every tool had a job. The Dark Ages gives you a wider battlefield, a heavier Slayer, and it also gives you enough fodder and survivability that the weapon sandbox can pretty much shrink down to 2 or 3 weapons. And that's where the formula change really starts to hurt this game. The shield is the best new idea in the game. It gives the Dark Ages its identity, and when parries, shield throws, charges, and counters are flowing, the game absolutely works. That's why I had so many missions where I had less than 5 deaths. The problem is that the rest of the new systems don't evolve enough to carry the same weight. The Atlan mech is awesome, but it's awesome for the first time because it turns you into a walking siege engine. But after the initial spectacle, the mechanics are super simple. Same with the dragon sections. They have the same problem. They look cool, they give the campaign scale, and they help make the world feel bigger, but they never become deep enough to feel like a major gameplay pillar. I think about Halo Reach. Halo Reach had the flying mission right before George dies, and that was really well built out, like combat mechanics, but it didn't overstay its welcome. As the dragon sections, I think they kind of overstayed their welcome. If you had one dragon section in the game, that'd probably be enough, but we get multiple. Again, by mission 14, I was already starting to feel bored with extra objectives and side content. That is usually a bad sign in any game, but because Doom is at its best when combat itself keeps pulling you forward, the Dark Ages still has great moments, but the campaign has stretches where the spectacle is doing more work than the mechanics, and that makes the final verdict conflict. Doom the Dark Ages is a good game. It has a strong identity, a killer aesthetic, and some of the best medieval war imagery the series has ever used. It makes the Slayer feel heavier, meaner, and more grounded. It also proves that Doom can move away from eternal speed and still function as Doom. But for me, it doesn't beat Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal. I would go back and play it in a few months, maybe a few years, but I don't know that I'd finish the entire campaign. Doom 2016, it has a clean loop. I could go back and play that whole campaign again. Doom Eternal, it's more demanding. It's a demanding combat puzzle. I could go back and play that full game. Doom the Dark Ages right now, it has a strong fantasy war presentation, but the weakest long-term combat variety of the modern trilogy. So, is Doom the Dark Ages harder than Doom Eternal? No, not even close. It's easier, heavier, less mechanically demanding. The challenge comes in spikes, while Doom Eternal's challenge lives in the entire combat loop. The Dark Ages trade speed for weight, complexity, and readability, and weapon juggling for shield-centered dominance. And that trade creates a game that is more accessible, more cinematic, but also leaves less replayability and less grip across the full game. After 121 deaths, my answer is simple. Doom the Dark Ages is the easiest modern Doom, the coolest looking medieval power fantasy in the series, and the first time I felt a new formula becoming impressive before it became repetitive. But objectively speaking, which game is the hardest? Well, Doom 2016, I died 113 times. In Doom Eternal, I died 135 times. Making Doom Eternal the hardest game in the series, with Doom the Dark Ages right in the middle. But I'm curious to see, what do you think? And if you've made it this far into the video, I'd greatly appreciate if you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can tune in for more videos in this series where I'm trying to determine, objectively speaking, how hard certain game series are in comparison to each other. I've already done Halo, I've already done BioShock, and I've even done the Legend of Spyro series. If that's a series that you enjoy, tune in for the next one.